You're listening to Live from the Heartland Show on Saturday morning, November 9th in the year 2013. I'm Michael James. I'm here with Katy, Hogan, and Thom Clark. And we have one of our favorite guests coming up right now. She's here, Kari Lydersen. Good morning to you, Kari.
Thank you.
Kari Lydersen is one of Chicago's most accomplished freelance reporters, having done work in both English and Spanish, domestically, a little bit through Central America, and both online and in print. I think I first encountered you doing reader stories, and this is a most remarkable book, which I have not finished reading, but in part because of the way it lays out this saga of a city mayor who is making the wrong kind of waves, if I can put it that way. The episodic way that you've told the story is really a pretty powerful way. It also I find myself reading a particular part, and I got to put it down and think some more, even though I lived through some of this stuff.
It makes you think.
That's good. Kari, what a wonderful accomplishment.
So one of the themes that I think is embedded in Mayor 1% is what's happening to workers in this city, and that's been one of your real strengths as a reporter over the years, in the way that you've looked at organized and sometimes unorganized labor and different worker movements in this city. Was that just, as you began to consider putting this tome together, which Haymarket Books really nudged you to do, if I understand the story correctly, how did you decide to focus on the way workers are being treated by this current mayor as kind of the prevailing theme and structure of the book?
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of, that focus just kind of came about organically, and I think the original idea was to do more about Rahm Emanuel's background and sort of let people know what they had signed on for, but it changed really quickly because it became, really, to me, more interesting how, well, for one thing, he alienated unions and regular people, I think, a lot more quickly than would have even been expected. And then the way that people responded, including unions and just workers in general, became just such a fascinating story. And then with the teachers' strike and just so many different parts of it.
Well, one of the things that's in the book, and it's toward the back, which part I did read, and it's about the janitors union at O'Hare, and a kind of systematic taking apart of the union and unions' involvement at public spaces like the airports and schools, and bringing in private contractors. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because it kind of was a very moving section, and a little bit sad about people taking like $4 to $5 pay cuts and being actually ousted from jobs that they'd worked for many years.
Yeah, well, along with the teachers, the SEIU Local 1 janitors has been one of the stories that I think has just been really inspiring and fun to follow. Not inspiring, I mean, they did sort of lose this battle around O'Hare, which I can give a few details about in a second, but the way their larger campaign, I think, has been really inspiring. They really ran with the Mayor 1% moniker, and they were at the mayor's house numerous times and doing just really kind of creative protests and rallies, letting him know that, you can't do these kinds of things and then just go home and, not have to face what you've done to middle and low income working people. So anyway, the janitors, the situation at O'Hare, I think, is also important to think about because people talk a lot about the mayor privatizing city services, which he has done, and naturally public jobs are lost when you privatize something. But the janitorial service at O'Hare was already privatized, and at the police stations and at other places. But even though it was already privatized, the local one did have a pretty decent contract for this work, and the mayor basically busted that union by bringing in a different contractor that, and this gets also to the way that, as much as he framed himself as a reformer, the mayor has a lot of connections to the old, kind of corrupt past. The contractor he brought in, Simon, had the Sun-Times has covered this in a lot of great detail, had a lot of reputed mob ties and a lot of scandal attached to his name. But anyway, the jobs that Simon created at O'Hare were much lower paid and more part-time, and a lot of the SEIU Local 1 janitors, even if they'd wanted to get these jobs at like a $4 pay cut, weren't hired. So, that's a place where it's not only about privatization, but it's about how the city deals with its contracts.
I wonder if we're getting a picture here of a split in the traditional constituency supporting the party, even the Democratic Machine Party here in the city and county. And what I mean by that is the unions that are really doing a lot of organizing around lower wage workers seem to be the ones really taking it on the chin now, whereas the traditional trade unions seem to get their city college new building contracts and whatnot, or expressway contracts, or expansion of rail yard contracts. Well, I'm curious to what extent you were able, in the way you put the threads of this really newer mayor together in this book. I mean, it was amazing how much you already had to write about for a guy who hasn't even finished serving his first term in office. Are we seeing, and we could throw the pension crisis in this and a bunch of other things, are we seeing split ranks by this guy from Wilmette in the way that he's moving in and privatizing all of our public sector? I mean, is that part of his goal here?
I don't know if he's obviously privatization and relying on the private sector is obviously a really big part of his philosophy. And in terms of the unions, I mean, my understanding is that there's always been, splits and a lot of tension between sort of the trades unions and who were really, really close with Daley, and then the other unions. And I mean, one thing I thought that was interesting right off the bat with Emanuel is that he actually did alienate even the building trades unions and the ones that had traditionally been really in with the mayor really quickly. And then I think he realized his mistake, and he did eventually make peace with them within, I think, that first summer that he was in office. And then he's doing, with all the building you talked about, and also the overhaul of the water infrastructure, that's created tons of building trades jobs, and those are, good things that we needed. So I don't think that divide and conquer is necessarily new, but if anything, he didn't realize right off the bat how effective that could be, and maybe he's catching on to that now.
Well, I mean, to some extent, and Thom, you can probably speak to this better. To some extent, he's got to know, when stuff is coming down the pike from D.C. For example, Chicago got a good amount of Rebuild America money, or whatever that thing that Obama passed in his first term was. Money for
the Recovery Act money.
Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. So I would think that Rahm has a little bit of an inside track on how to feed into the tributary that's coming from D.C. Because of his connections there, and possibly with the thought in mind, won't I look good? Playing the game that's there to be played. But I don't think that has panned out in these first couple of years.
One of the early words about why Barack thought the NATO G8 summit was a gift is that he felt he hadn't done enough for Chicago in his first couple of years in office. And I'm still waiting for that book to be written, because the back and forth that took place, the G8 part being removed,
right.
So the NATO summit was lesser of a weekend. I bring this up, of course, because this is another theme in your book, is that whole exercise in trying to maintain First Amendment rights and rally against the powers that be, whether it was the international folks coming to town or what the mayor was doing here. To my mind, what was interesting, having to live through the NATO weekend and actually having a tussle with City Hall, because we had the temerity of run live video off our website of the protesters on the mayor's home. It seems to me that this very media-conscious mayor is also pretty thin-skinned, and every time there's a group that is trying to bring grievances to the mayor, they somehow end up in Ravenswood outside his home. That NATO weekend, to my mind, was very intriguing by what both the nurses did on the first day of that weekend, as well as the mental health workers that during the weekend itself, with the downtown protests kind of being window dressing, but actually not that important given the other local dynamics that are going on. how you try to bring us back into some of those when you look at the NATO weekend. Ultimately, what happened to the city? What's happening with those workers now after they did, I think, pretty effective protests in trying to get the message or their stories out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole part of the big story with the lead up and the protests during NATO was that, obviously the plan has always, with these mega protests, has always been to bring up these global issues, and with NATO, naturally the focus would be on militarization. But I think it was pretty clear right from the start that it was, especially when the G8 was included, that it was going to have a really strong focus on economic justice, and then naturally by extension on economic justice in Chicago. So I would imagine that even compared to other mega protests, there was much more of a local, it was much more about the mayor and about things going on locally than, say a protest against, one of the other anti-free trade or anti-militarization protests in another world city. So yeah, and then in terms of what's happened since the fallout from NATO and the NATO protests, I mean, there was this big surplus fund that the city has been distributing to really worthy projects, and that's probably, but so that, I mean, that's a good thing, but it does make you wonder if they could raise all that money for the summit and then even have all this leftover money that they do give to good community groups. Why can't they just do that? Why can't the mayor work his private sector connections or his philanthropic connections and get that kind of money without needing the excuse of a big global summit?
I'm gonna go a little bit further back in the book and ask Kari to tell us a little bit about the background activities of the current mayor, Rahm Emanuel. I'm particularly interested in his role in NAFTA, and I also would be interested in you talking a little bit about how he became a congressman and kind of put on a different face to deep Nancy Kazak. And I also am really curious about the first ladies, both Clinton and Michelle Obama, and their relationship with him.
Okay. Oh, wait, let me try to remember all those.
I got a couple other co-hosts here, and they got a lot of good questions. I knew I had to mark my turf. Right. Mark my turf.
Anything you can remember.
Okay, so with NAFTA, short answer to each. With NAFTA, I mean, when someone's, in the White House, it's always hard to know exactly, when they're not the president, how much is their own initiative and how much they're serving the president. But NAFTA was one thing that Rahm Emanuel did really take a lot of credit for, and even in more recent years has described as one of his proud accomplishments.
The North American Free Trade Agreement.
Right, and that at the time, as it was being really hotly debated, labor was saying that it would be a terrible thing for American jobs and for American unions, and then also people predicted the really traumatic effect it would have on Mexico. And so that was, very much out in the open before it was passed. And then there's plenty of studies that back up that all those predictions did come true. It did cause massive loss of U.S. jobs and really devastating effects in Mexico. So it's pretty telling that both at the time and since, Rahm Emanuel has talked about NAFTA as something he's really proud of and as a success.
Yeah, well, why doesn't he see what? Anyway, go ahead. You've got a whole lineup of questions, so go ahead.
And then re-ask it.
No, it's all right.
And then just, I guess, really quickly on the election for Congress, that's where he very much relied on old machine Democratic Party daily people's support to beat Nancy Kazak, who was a really popular, from the Harold Washington administration, more populist candidate with arguably a lot more grassroots organic support. So, I think that's also just indicative of the way he's tries to kind of spin himself as cleaning things up, as at the same time as, relying on the old, all the old Chicago machine. And then the third thing
I read in your book that it was actually Hillary Clinton who fell out. Ron fell out of favor with her, and she helped move him out of the White House. And there was an interesting story that when he was told that he was sort of demoted or was going to be put out, he wanted the president to tell him directly, and he got to stick around a little bit. But then there were always rumors, and I don't know if they're true or not, that he didn't get along real well with Michelle Obama, and that Barack Obama was really glad when he left, or encourage that to happen. Any news on that?
Yeah, well, I don't know if no new news, but a lot of the insider accounts from the Times say that he had terrible relationships with Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama, and just women in general. There's talk of this thing called the women problem in the Obama White House that Rahm Emanuel was really blamed for, and he made one really telling comment, which I think he's denied, but he said to some staffer something about just take your tampon out and get this done, or something along those lines, that Carol Moseley Braun actually brought up in the mayoral race to say basically this guy's a sexist.
Yeah, when he worked for the Illinois Public, I'm not sure way back, he was sort of a community organizer. There are people who worked with him who were not real high on his respect for women's skills.
So in those occasional moments where I yearn for the old Mayor Daley, because he had some connection with constituents that I don't see this current mayor. I see the current mayor as a technocrat in the true sense of the word, who revels in managing managers, who are mostly younger folks that are willing to put in 70 hours a week. But what do they know about running city government?
Well,
and they're
much
gone
less,
in 2 years.
And not only what do they know about running government, what do they know about being part of a city community?
Exactly.
And I mean, that's, I think, what is really lost when you pluck a Rahm Emanuel who, made his game serving the 1%, which you rightfully, usurp in your title. I think you really did it well, Kari, to say Mayor 1%. You used the Occupy language that is such good shorthand for the economic reality of America today, and the scariest possible threat to the Republic, in my mind, is that 1% versus 99%. And I think that what we miss in Chicago right now is not only in the mayor's office and in various bureaucratic offices where, say, small business people have to go and face these 20-somethings who came out of Yale and don't know diddly squat about Chicago neighborhoods, much less about how doing small business actually makes the city what it can be, instead throws up all of the barricades to progress. Why did you choose to highlight and therefore, I think, validate the Occupy language?
Well, I think, and the title was actually Haymarket's choice, which ended up being a fantastic choice, so I won't take credit for choosing it, but it's not only the Occupy language, which I think is really appropriate for all the reasons you said, but Chicagoans have really run with it. SEIU Local 1 adopted it, and the teachers, and I mean, any protest you went to, there'd be numerous signs, so I think it really reflects, the sense, not only Occupy, but even a broader, even people who wouldn't identify themselves as part of Occupy really feel that way about the mayor.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering, and I've used this line before, Mayor Daddy Knows Best represents a certain management, administrative, political style, and I wonder if that very style, having a daddy who will take care of us, is part of the reason that we're having trouble seeing any kind of loyal opposition to come up to oppose the policy side of what he's doing. I'm not asking you to crystal ball a whole lot here, but in doing your research in your book, did you see any incipient progressive movements growing up in the wards to take this guy on?
Well, just, more recently, within the past couple months, there was that big Take Back Chicago rally a month or so ago. And I mean, so there's definitely an effort to really, intentionally launch an opposition movement that could be the base for an opposition mayoral candidate. But, and I think there is definitely, sort of some new energy pumped into Chicago community groups and unions because of what the mayor's been doing. But whether that could translate into a valid candidate within, a year's time, not even to mention all the money that Emanuel has is, probably a pretty doubtful proposition.
Kari, what about on the governor's, on that level? His relationship with the governor has not been good. He's probably not close to Vallis. Rahm is rumored to be close to Rauner, the Republican, who he had business relations with. What's your sense of how this is all playing out from the city level to all the way to Springfield?
Yeah, well, I mean, his relationship with Rauner is really telling, and I think it's way more than rumored. I think it's pretty clear they're really good personal friends, and I mean, Rauner was sort of a proxy for Emanuel especially during the teachers' strike, and even other than that. So, he's a perfect example of probably where Rahm Emanuel's real politics lie, sort of socially liberal, but otherwise really conservative person. So it makes sense that, and I mean, I would love to know why Bill Daley pulled out of the race, but it definitely makes sense that Rahm would like to see Rauner as governor, and who knows what would happen with them working together.
What's your take on Vallis being the lieutenant governor nominee with the governor?
It's interesting for all the reasons you're saying. I mean, who knows? I guess, and then if you think beyond the next term, what that would mean. I mean, maybe I don't really know the talk about Rahm Emanuel's feelings about Vallis, but I mean, I suppose I could see them planning to work together, another 5 or more years down the line.
You've been out promoting this book for about a month or so. Have you heard from Fifth Floor? Have any of the mayor's handlers given you a call to find out why you got the stoop you got?
Well, I haven't, and I heard from them, and I had been in contact with them early on, and really trying to be in contact with them throughout the process of writing the book, and they just didn't want to, other than giving me a couple names of sort of pro-mayor labor people, they just didn't cooperate at all, which I think is also telling. I mean, these are really valid issues we're talking about, and it is, as an elected official, I think it is your responsibility to communicate with journalists. So to not even get, to be writing a book about him and not even get 5 minutes.
You do talk about the good and the bad with Rahm Emanuel. I mean, you do talk
Right.
about on some social issues where he's been good, supporting gay marriage, those kind of things. So I thought the reporting was really good. It wasn't like a leftist diatribe
Right.
published by a progressive publisher.
Yeah, I'm glad you think
You
that.
did good, Kari.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. I'm a little less. I worked against his election, and was very frustrated by the adoption, the automatic, unquestioning adoption of him as the prince, the crown prince by both the black community in Chicago and progressives. And I had one guy, a friend of mine who is Jewish, say, "Sorry, Kate, I had to vote for the Jew," basically is the way he put it. And I understood.
It's like us saying we got to vote for the white guy.
Well, it's not exactly like that, Michael. It's a little different than that. We do know about white skin privilege, right? And the history of, okay, good. We don't have to go through that. But I have very little faith that the Chicago voting community will pull its act together and find a candidate, Tom. So as the loyal opposition, or as the pissed off opposition going forward, what do you think are the weakest places of this mayor and of his administration? And we have a few minutes.
Yeah, well, he's obviously really alienated huge parts of the African American community that went for him, probably partly because of Clinton and Obama's
Exactly.
support. So, I mean, it'll be a big question how, and it's not obviously one cohesive community, different
Right.
African American communities, how they vote or do they vote in the next election, and also what will he do? He has been trying to repair those relationships, obviously, with some, arguably some kind of token efforts and some slightly more meaningful efforts. So, how will that unfold during the next year? But that's definitely his weak point, is having, really both ignored and angered such a huge and important part of the city's population.
Right.
Tom, you asked the last question.
This is a wonderfully footnoted, episodic journey through a young mayor's career so far, done on a pretty tight deadline, meticulously reported. What chapter did you not have time to write when you finally had to hit the printing deadline that you would like to do now when you're done with your book tour?
A writerly question.
Man.
Very nice.
Geez. I have to think fast. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a chapter from the past that's left out, although there's many, I'm sure. But just, I'd love to just keep following this. You know, I'd love to do a sequel, both about what he continues to do in office and, even more interestingly, how the city responds.
I'm afraid you're destined to do so, Kari.
The book is Mayor 1%, Rahm Emanuel and the Rise of Chicago's 99%, by Kari Lydersen, put out by Haymarket Books, a local publisher of some renown, for a wonderful, wonderful library of tomes. Congratulations on getting this done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
congratulations.
We want to
Thanks
thank
for being
everybody
here.
who appeared on the show, the people from the Mission Arts, having an event here at the Heartland on the 17th. We want to thank our new fellow downtown, Nolan Chin. We want to thank Grant Stesko. We want to thank Paul and Mary Wozniak, and a whole lot of other people and Hal James too, he's on the camera. And we want to thank all the people who tuned in and listened in. Eric is here. I know he's wanting to know about, some football games. We'll talk about that later.
Next time, a farm report.
And we are going to have next week Dave Megacy played football.
Yay.
And we'll be at the Music Box for the Trials of Muhammad Ali panel that Kari and I will also be on Wednesday night, the 13th.
Plant your bulbs, people. Plant your bulbs.
Is that the farm report for Rogers Park?
No, it's just this weekend.
Our egg production is down with the cold weather already.
That'll happen. That'll happen.
Thanks,
happens.
everybody. Do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do. All power to the people. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine.
Amen.
Stand in the sunshine.
You know what?
Do you have
Listening to
chickens?
88.7 WLUW, Chicago Sound Alliance, broadcasting from the campus of Loyola University.
The money. I got it on my notes and we were slipping.